If you've had to buy anything lately, you've probably noticed that just about everything is more expensive now than it was this time last year. This is inflation, and it's here in a big way.
A monster red alert on inflation. The consumer price index for October clocking in its biggest year-over-year gain since 1990.
If we look at $1.50 more a gallon for gas, everything we buy now costs more.
Prices surging more than they have in 30 years, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight.
Inflation, which essentially means high costs and lower buying power, continued to surge last month, with prices rising at the fastest pace in more than 30 years.
They're feeling the pain of rising inflation. We're paying more for just about everything.
Although we think about inflation as an increase in the cost of goods and services we buy, it has a way of reaching its tentacles into areas that extend beyond just the price tag. Social Security is one of these areas where the impact of inflation isn't immediately obvious, but it does affect both the overall health of the system and the individuals who are receiving benefits. In today's video, I want to talk about how inflation affects Social Security in two distinct ways. First, high inflation actually has the effect of decreasing net benefits in some cases, and then we have to consider how inflation could increase the rate that money is leaving the trust fund and thus hastening the point in time where benefits have to be cut. But before we jump into that, I just updated my Social Security cheat sheet for 2022, and I did this with some feedback from you. I tried really hard to keep everything on one page in the prior editions, but ultimately had to concede that it was getting really hard to read that small print. So now it's expanded into 2 pages, and I use this as an opportunity to add a couple of additional things that I think you'll find of great value. Now, if you're already on my email list, you already have this in your email. But if you're not, you need to get it. This has all of the most important rules and numbers from the massive Social Security website condensed down into just 2 pages. And now it's much easier to read. You can find a link for this down in the description. Okay, so back to the conversation on the impact of inflation to Social Security. One thing we don't know is whether this is just a burst of inflation caused by demand and supply shocks, or if this will stay around for a while. I do hope it's temporary because the health of Social Security will suffer if it's not. So there are 2 ways that Social Security is affected by high inflation. First, it results in lower net benefits to retirees. And second, the higher payments are damaging to the longevity of the trust fund. Now, I want to dive into each of these separately. And first, let's talk about how this affects the health of the Social Security system, and then we'll cover how high inflation actually lowers your net benefits. Every year, the Social Security trustees issue a report that dives into the longevity of the trust fund. So when you hear people say that the trust fund is projected to be depleted in 2033, this is the document they use as their source. To arrive at this forecast, the trustees have to estimate multiple demographic and economic assumptions. Today, I just want to focus on the economic assumptions and specifically the assumptions they've made about price inflation moving forward. This is because, as many of you know, the annual cost of living adjustment to Social Security benefits is increased based on price inflation. Specifically, it's based on a measurement known as the CPI-W. If inflation moves up, benefits increase. And if inflation moves higher than their forecast, this means that more money is needed to pay benefits than they forecasted. And if it's taken more money to pay benefits, the trust fund balance will decline by more than expected, especially if wage inflation hasn't kept up. So that brings us to the forecast of the Social Security trustees. If you look at the most recent report, their long-term assumption is 2.4%. Well, as we all know, the actual rate of inflation reported in October of 2021 was more than twice that rate. If inflation continues at a higher rate than they forecast, you can look for the upcoming trustees report to begin reflecting that the trust fund will be depleted at an earlier date, and with it, the benefit cuts that will be mandatory unless laws are changed. Now, that's a fairly obvious effect that inflation has on Social Security, but there are other impacts that are less obvious but no less dangerous. The first is how healthcare inflation reduces your net benefit payment. Specifically, I'm talking about Medicare premiums, although the other related healthcare costs are certainly an issue as well. But since Medicare premiums are typically deducted directly from your Social Security check, any increase in Medicare premiums directly reduce your net benefit. Now, I will say this, though. It's not as bad as some think it is. I've seen lots of comments from viewers who truly believe that every year the cost of living adjustment is completely offset by the increase in Medicare premiums. It's not, but it still has an impact. Now, I know charts can be hard to grasp on a small screen, especially if you're watching this mobile, but I do want you to see this data. This is data I've calculated based on an individual who is collecting an average Social Security benefit. This shows the actual cost of living adjustment versus the cost of living adjustment after the effect of Medicare premiums were adjusted out. The blue lines are the COLA before adjustments, and the orange line is the cost of living adjustment after taking into account the increased Part B Medicare premium. As you can see, in years where there was a cost of living adjustment, the Medicare Part B premium increase didn't actually have all that great of an impact here. So this chart here completely destroys the argument that Medicare premiums eat up all of the increases you receive from the annual cost of living adjustment. If you average that out since 1981, you'll find that the average Social Security benefit has grown by 2.49% per year when the actual cost of living adjustment has been 2.83. So not quite the difference that some think. However, the end result, though, is that your benefit goes up by the amount of inflation, which, all things being equal, leaves you in a neutral position where your purchasing power is still the same as it was the year prior, but then your benefit is reduced a little because healthcare inflation ate some of it up. The other effect that inflation has on Social Security is really sneaky, and this is how much of your benefit you'll have to give back to the government through taxes. This is what I talked about in the video I released not long ago called The Hidden Truth About Social Security Taxes. A lot of people are already aware that at least part of their Social Security benefits will be taxable. And then there are others who are taken by complete surprise when they find this out. And in some ways, it doesn't seem fair. But whether it seems fair or not, Social Security benefits can be counted as taxable income. And this is something that inflation is going to make worse. Let me explain. When benefits first became taxable back in 1984, only about 8% of all recipients had to pay tax on their Social Security benefit. Now that number is closer to 50% of all recipients, and it's projected to increase even more. If you really want to see a staggering number, look at the dollars collected through this tax. In the first year of benefit taxation, there was a total of just over $3 billion that came in. Just 8 years later, that number had doubled to just over $6 billion, and it kept growing from there. Last year, 2020, there was more than $40 billion in taxes collected on benefits, and by 2029, this is projected to be $94 billion. So what started out impacting a very small number of people now cast a much wider net, and here's why. Since benefits became taxable, the income thresholds that trigger taxation have never been changed. They are still frozen at the levels where they were when these laws were signed into place, and they're likely to remain there too. This means that as income levels continue to rise through inflation, more and more people will be pushed in to this tax net. For an example of this, you can look at the wage inflation through the average wage index, because looking at the growth of wages of working Americans does give us a good indication of what a retirement saver can expect once they stop working. In 1984, when benefits first became taxable, the average wage index was just over $16,000. That's grown to just over $54,000 in 2020. So it's fairly easy to see how income thresholds that don't change will eventually apply to more and more people as incomes increase. But the big question is, what can you do about it? Well, unfortunately, you probably can't change the law, but this doesn't mean you can't build a plan to lessen the impact. For example, distributions from a Roth IRA or Roth 401k are not counted against you in determining whether your Social Security benefits are taxable. You could have an unlimited level of income from these sources and still not pay tax on Social Security. So if you don't have either of those types of accounts, you might ought to check out starting to save in one or even doing a Roth conversion. Or it may be that you need to take income from your retirement savings first while delaying your Social Security. That way you'll eventually be able to get a greater share of your retirement income from Social Security, which should lower your overall taxable income. Another strategy may be to use the qualified charitable distributions from your IRAs once you reach age 72. This strategy works pretty well for those who are in the habit of giving money to their church or some other nonprofit, but ultimately, I really don't know if any of those will be an option for you But the most important thing to realize is that filing for Social Security is not a do-it-yourself project. I know it seems so simple, especially when we look at Social Security as this one little silo of your retirement income. But before you file, you need to have a plan, and you need to understand how all the pieces work together. You need to work with someone who can help you develop a step-by-step strategy. For so long, the focus has been on maximizing Social Security benefits, just looking at them again in their own little silo and figuring out what's the filing strategy that would net the most in gross benefits over a certain life expectancy. That's the wrong way to look at it. Instead, the focus needs to be on optimizing your benefits, making sure the filing strategy fits with all of the other pieces of your financial life. And if you want some help with this, my team can help you build a plan that makes the most of your Social Security. There's a link in the description where you can schedule a complimentary call and talk to someone on my team about how this process works. So I hope this video was helpful and left you with some information you can use to get every dollar in benefits that you or your clients deserve. Thanks for watching.